This is a game called Lines of Action. It's played on an 8x8 board. The players take turns, black going first. On your move, you can move a piece in one of the 8 directions, and the number of spaces the piece moves is determined by the line in which it moves on, hence the name Lines of Action. You can jump over your own pieces, but you cannot jump over your opponent's pieces. But you can capture your opponent's pieces if you land on them. You cannot capture your own pieces like in most games. So let me walk through a game to show you how the pieces would typically move. So on black's turn, black could potentially move this piece a total of 2 squares because in this direction, because there are 2 pieces in this line. On white's turn, he could potentially capture this piece, and the goal is to join all of your pieces so that they are connected into one solid body in all of 8 directions. The strategy, capturing a piece can work both ways. You are getting some pieces out of the way because remember your opponent's pieces can potentially block you, but then your opponent also has fewer pieces to join up, and indeed if you capture all except for one of your opponent's pieces, your opponent would win because one piece by default is considered connected. There are some debates as to what happens when you have a simultaneous connection. In some variants it's a draw, in some variants the player to move wins. And there are some strategy considerations. In most tournament games it's considered a draw, as it is. So here's another capture. I played it out with 2 computer opponents so I could show you a typical game. Here white has just 1 piece on this diagonal, so he can just slide this by 1. So here black piece is blocked, so he cannot move 1, 2, 3. This would not be a legal move because it's blocked, but he can move in a different direction, so maybe up here. It turns out the computer did this, so I'll follow that. So here white is moving 3 spaces in this direction, and it is allowed to jump over your own piece. And black makes a capture, so he has 1, 2 pieces, so he can move 1, 2. And another important strategy is mobility, the number of legal moves that you have, because that tends to imply that you're not being blocked in. Here white moves 1, 2 because he has 2 pieces on this line. And by the line, it includes the pieces behind your piece as well as the piece forward of the square you're moving to. So it's the entire line. So if we're talking about a horizontal or vertical line, it's always the number of pieces on the 8 spaces in that line. So here black also jumps over one of his own pieces, and there's 3 pieces in this line, so he moves 1, 2, 3 to capture that. White has just 1 piece on this line, so he can move 1. Black has 2 pieces on this line, so he can move 2 in this direction. So for example, if black wants to move this piece, he could move 1, 2 because he has 2 pieces on this line. So it includes the pieces beyond your move, either behind you or ahead of your destination. So I'll make some more moves until we get to the end game so I can show you some interesting things that happen. So notice that both players want to move toward the center to because there are a lot of lines that converge in the center as well as a lot of potential for blocking your opponent. And so, in the end game, capturing might not be the safest thing to do because you reduce the number of pieces that your opponent needs to join in order to win. It turns out Lines of Action has roughly the same complexity as Othello, and you might think that because pieces are being captured, the game would simplify and you could potentially write endgame table base where you have a set of all of the possible endgames with fewer than X pieces and the correct move for each of those positions. But it's actually a lot more difficult than you would think, because in a typical terminal state of Lines of Action where somebody has won, there are typically still 10 or more pieces on the board, and that's potentially lots and lots of positions. It's not like chess where the number of pieces could drop to 3 or 4 when somebody wins. So usually you have the basic end games and the end games that converge down to basic end games where you can build an endgame table base, and I believe they've done it for 6 pieces. So here white moves 2 spaces in this direction, and black moves 1, 2, 3. And this is a good capture to make because black is actually joining his pieces and getting a piece out of the way that's potentially blocking him in. And white starts to converge all his pieces in this area, but black can win with this move. He's moving 1 space along this diagonal line, which contains just his 1 piece. And now all of his pieces are connected. So it's connected vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. So as long as it's one body, it's a win. So the reason you could have simultaneous connection is that you capture a piece that's isolated while connecting at the same time. So for example, in this position right here, black could move 2 spaces along this diagonal because there are 2 pieces, and he would capture that, and now all black's pieces are connected and all white's pieces are connected. And depending on the rules, this is for most tournament rules nowadays, this is a draw. But strategically, some mathematicians have argued why this should be a win for black, so that's unfortunate. There are also different ways you could set up the opening. So if you recall, all of black's pieces were connected at 2 opposite ends of the board, and all of white's pieces on the other 2. In some variations, it's called, I believe it's called scrambled eggs. You have the pieces alternate between black and white at the beginning of the game. And this makes for a much longer game. Actually, playing it out on my computer, the computer is actually better at playing this. The reason for that is because the pieces now tend to block each other, so you have fewer legal moves per position, and so the computer is able to search much more deeply into the game at the opening. And it's always easy toward the end when there's fewer pieces and pieces have been exchanged because you have fewer legal moves to consider. So from my experience, the computer can search 1 or 2 moves further on opening positions of this variant. So it can go both ways. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy playing.